Air travel nowadays is different from what it was 15 to 20 years ago. During this time, now defunct airlines like Northwest, ATA, AirTran, Continental, and US Airways were well in operation. As a kid, I flew a fair amount on many of these airlines, but of course, this was long before I started making videos or keeping track of what planes I flew. For the longest time, I always wondered what planes I was flying on as a little kid, and while I had some general idea, I was always longing to know what aircraft they were precisely. Today, I'm excited to share that after doing some extensive digging and with the help of a fellow aviation nerd, I was able to recover a plethora of information regarding flights I took many moons ago, as far back as 19 years ago. In this video, I'll show you all how I did it and how you can do it as well. So let's first start out by helping you all, because I'm sure any AvGeek would love to know how to look up previous flights. There is this absolute gem of a website by the Wandering Aramean that I'll leave a link to in the description. And no, before you ask, this video is not sponsored. In fact, the website itself hasn't been updated in years, but still serves as a really valuable resource. Basically, it lets you look up any US domestic flight from as far back as 1995. That's because the site uses old OAG or Official Airline Guide data and schedules from all these past years. This means that the site has data for most US domestic flights that took place since January 1st of 1995. But of course, there are catches. You might recall that I said US domestic flights, meaning that this site unfortunately doesn't work for domestic flights in other countries and international flights in general. I learned that the hard way. Also, prior to certain years, the site is missing data for certain US carriers like AirTran or Spirit Airlines. However, the site does have AirTran data after 2003 and Spirit Airlines data from 2015 onward. If you happen to have any old boarding passes or itineraries, as I did, you can use this site to look up those flights. Here's how I did it. Alright everyone, so I am currently looking up all of the old flights that I literally just an hour or two ago, I literally just found all of the old itineraries and confirmations from all of these flights that were such a long time ago when I was very little. You can see this is 2007, and my dad kept all of these old itineraries. Huge props to him. I mean, he literally keeps every possible piece of paper that we ever get. He keeps all of that, and he'd been holding on to all of these papers for, over the past couple of years. 2007, so it's 2023. It's been 16 years and he still has all of these documents. So I had been looking for this stuff for so long. I'd always wondered what kind of planes was I flying on when I was little, and you can just see what I've come across. This was our Hawaii trip in 07, and then this whole thing here, and this was San Diego in 08, and this was Hawaii again in 2009. This was crazy because previously I never thought I had ever visited LAX until I went earlier this year in January for a day trip. I never thought I'd ever been through LA before, and I never thought I'd ever flown to MSP before either, but we did, and I haven't figured out what planes these are. I'm about to go there, but right now I am currently searching. I'm looking up these flights right now, our 2007 Hawaii trip. I just looked up these, as you just saw the itinerary, my New York trip in 07, and I'm so happy about that. But now I'm going to show you all how I do it. Just kind of a live demonstration, a live reaction to me figuring out what planes that I was flying on. So we're going to look up this one right here, AA3450 Champaign to DFW 12/14/07. So here's the site. I'll leave a link to it in the description, but basically this site allows you to look up basically any domestic US flight from back in the day, as long as it meets the dates here from January 1st of 95 through 12/31 of 22. I guess that's when they stopped keeping track, but what was the date on this? 12/14. of '07. So we're just going to put in here 12/14/07. And we just click search, and it populates all of the planes, the flights that took place that day. So flight 3450, that was us. And you can see 623 AE is the airplane that I flew. It's Embraer 145. And that's basically how I've been looking up all of these flights. Pretty crazy. I don't know what I'll do later when I find out the other stuff. But this is gonna be one heck of a video. I mean, this is crazy. I will look up the Phoenix, or what was it? Dallas Phoenix? Yeah, Dallas. Where is it? DFW Phoenix. I'm gonna look this flight up real quick, and all the rest of them too, and then show y'all what I come up with. I could not tell you how many times I was left dumbfounded by what I found out from this site, because a lot of the flights I was looking up were on planes that either don't exist anymore or planes I never would have imagined that I ever flew. Here are just some of the many flights I looked up from way back when, of which I was able to recover data. This first set of flights is one that I've probably been wondering about the most. As I mentioned earlier, my dad held on to many old files from the past, including documents from various trips we took. This includes the boarding passes from the flights we took back in 2004 when moving to the mainland United States from Hawaii. I was 10 months old at the time, and you can see here I was given a special boarding pass because of my infancy. Pretty much for as long as I can remember, I always thought it was United Airlines that flew us to the mainland when we were moving. Never in a million years did I ever imagine that it was American Transair or ATA that we flew. It was an ATA 757-300, registration November 557 Tango Zulu, that we first flew from Honolulu to San Francisco. After a tight connection in San Francisco, we connected onto a 757-200, November 527 Alpha Tango, with service to Chicago Midway. ATA Airlines would cease operations 4 years later in 2008, but apparently these days there's another ATA Airlines that operates in Iran. It's funny because they literally almost have the exact same logo design as the American ATA, but I guess that doesn't really matter anymore. The 757-300 we flew eventually joined Continental Airlines and actually still flies today with United as November 78866. The 757-200 that we flew most recently flew passengers for US Airways and later American as November 204 Uniform Whiskey. It now flies cargo for SF Airlines in China as Bravo 222 Mike. Now, even though I was 10 months old at the time, these actually weren't my first set of flights. If I'm not mistaken, we had flown to Kahului, Maui the week before on Hawaiian Airlines, so my first flights actually were Honolulu to Kahului and back on the Hawaiian Airlines 717-200. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find the boarding passes or any information regarding these flights. The second trip that I was able to recover information from came in late 2007 when my family and I went to New York, as we always do, to visit family. Back then, of course, there were more airlines, more services, and ticket fares weren't too horrible. This trip took us on board Northwest Airlines from Indianapolis to Newburgh Stewart, New York, with a stopover each way in Detroit. We flew a nearly 40-year-old Northwest DC-941, registered November 755 November Whiskey, built in 1968, to Detroit first before connecting onto a Northwest Airlink CRJ-200, November 8965 Echo, to Newburgh. A few days later, on my 4th birthday, we flew back on another CRJ-200, November 8932 Charlie, first to Detroit before connecting onto a DC-951, November 676 Mike Charlie, back to Indianapolis. All 4 aircraft would later join Delta Airlines when the 2 carriers merged the following year, and none of them are flying as of today. Now, this next trip is my personal favorite of them all. In December 2007, my family and I went back to Hawaii on vacation. Our planned routing was Champaign to Dallas, to Phoenix, to Honolulu, and on the way back it was Honolulu to Phoenix, to Chicago, to Champaign. You saw earlier in the video that I looked up the first flight from Champaign to Dallas, but here are the other flights. Dallas to Phoenix was on an American MD-82, registered November 407 Alpha Alpha. When we got to Phoenix that day, that's when things went downhill. Our scheduled flight, US Airways 22 to Honolulu, was canceled because the aircraft had a mechanical issue. The coolest thing about the website I showed you all earlier is that when you look at US 22 on that specific day, you'll see asterisks by the departure and arrival times and no aircraft listed. That's again because the flight was canceled that day and we ended up spending the night in Phoenix. The next day came around and we didn't end up flying straight to Honolulu. No, we were rebooked via San Diego, and my dad held on to all the documents that showcase our rebooked itinerary. On this fax document, you see listed here our original itinerary, AA3450 to AA567 to US 22. Written directly below that, we see passenger has been rerouted onto the new flights US 180 to San Diego and then Hawaiian 15 to Honolulu. We were traveling with a lot of bags that trip, so we rechecked some of them with Hawaiian Airlines, a document we also still have. Handwritten was our new routing and then the Hawaiian Airlines flight we were rebooked on, where our checked bags would be sent. So what planes were we flying on the remainder of this trip? Alright, Phoenix to San Diego was on board a US Airways 757-200 November 908 Alpha Whiskey. This plane, while at the time painted in US Airways livery, used to wear the Arizona Cardinals livery when it flew with America West. The next flight, Hawaiian Airlines 15 from San Diego to Honolulu, was on board a 767-300 November 585 Hotel Alpha. Once that trip was over, we flew from Honolulu to Phoenix on US Airways 23, a 757-200 registered November 910 Alpha Whiskey. This was followed by an American MD-83 November 588 Alpha Alpha from Phoenix to Chicago. Our last flight to Champaign, Flight 3904, was canceled that night, and I remember us being stuck in O'Hare for a while before eventually being rebooked onto one of the later flights that I could never figure out which one it was. You can see just how many flights we used to get in Champaign back in the day. 7 flights to Chicago per day, that nowadays is only 2 flights a day. Now, previously I had logged this entire Hawaii trip with the following routing: Chicago to Phoenix to Honolulu with the opposite routing on the way back. That was speculation at the time, and of course it was totally wrong. By the way, the site that I used here is called my.flightradar24.com, and it's basically a site where you can log all of your flights. You just need to make an account first, and I'll leave a link below so you can check it out. As for the planes that we flew on this trip, the 145 November 623 Alpha Echo was retired last year. The US Airways 757s were either scrapped or partially scrapped in 2017. The Hawaiian 767 was scrapped in 2014. November 407 Alpha Alpha was retired in 2008, and November 588 Alpha Alpha actually went to fly with World Atlantic Airlines as November 806 Whiskey Alpha before being retired literally last week on June 10th. Alright, here's another cool trip I was able to recover. In May 2008, we flew to Atlanta for a few days, and this trip took us on AirTran. I knew I flew AirTran at some point, and I flew them on other occasions as well that I couldn't find any information of, so it was nice to have at least some info on what AirTran jets I flew. This trip took us from Bloomington to Atlanta and back on the 717-200, November 899 Alpha Tango to Atlanta, and November 925 Alpha Tango back to Bloomington. AirTran merged with Southwest in 2014, but all of their 717s went to Delta Airlines, and that's where both of these planes are right now. However, 899 is currently stored in Querétaro, Mexico since May 4th. Later that year, in November 2008, we flew Frontier Airlines to San Diego. This was back when Frontier was more of a leisure-focused airline than an ultra-low-cost carrier. In fact, they used to have these little TV screens in their planes before ultimately removing them. This trip took us from Indianapolis to San Diego via Denver and back, all 4 flights on Frontier A319s. The 2 that we flew across to California were November 904 Foxtrot Romeo and November 940 Foxtrot Romeo, while the 2 we flew back were November 925 Foxtrot Romeo and November 923 Foxtrot Romeo. 904 was retired from Frontier in 2014. In 2016, it would end up joining Ural Airlines in Russia and fly with them until being scrapped in 2022. 940 was retired from Frontier in 2012, and the following year it would also go to Russia. However, it would join Rossiya Airlines, who continue to fly it as of today. As for 925, I would actually end up flying it again 5 years later from Orlando to Bloomington in 2013. The plane would be retired in 2016. 923, on the other hand, lasted the longest with Frontier. It was retired in 2018 and the following year acquired by American Airlines, who continue to fly it today as November 774 X-Ray Foxtrot. The final domestic trip I wanted to share was another trip to Hawaii in 2009. This trip took us from Indianapolis to Minneapolis on a Northwest A319, registered November 329 November Bravo. There, we connected onto an A330-300 November 810 November Whiskey to Honolulu. On the way back, we flew a 757-300 November 592 November Whiskey from Honolulu to LAX before catching November 322 November Bravo, another A319, back to Indianapolis. This was a really cool trip to look up because before finding this out, I never thought I ever flew to Minneapolis. Also, prior to visiting LAX earlier this year, I didn't think I went there either. All 4 planes continue to fly with Delta as of today, and I ended up flying 592's sister aircraft, 591 November Whiskey, from St. Louis to Atlanta in 2022. So we just spent a lot of time looking over how to look up past US domestic flights, but what if I told you there was a way to look up past international flights and maybe even domestic flights elsewhere? Well, there is a way, but its effectiveness isn't as accurate as the tail number lookup site I showed earlier for US flights. It's a software called Flight Sim Dispatch, and what it's originally meant for is to accurately replicate past flights in simulators like Flight Simulator X. But it takes data directly from old schedules, so the results it gives you are flights that actually took place. The drawback to this software is that it's only compatible with PCs. I tried installing it on my MacBook, but it didn't work. So huge shout out to my good friend Connor Nix from Nix Aviation. I was introduced to the software because of him, but when I couldn't run it on my computer, he offered to look up some flights for me on his end. How Connor did it was that he would put in the ICAO code for the departure and arrival airports of the flight I was asking about. He would then specify the airline and then the year I was looking for. The software would then populate certain flight options and he would select the specific flight I asked about, in this case American Airlines Flight 98. A huge drawback of the software is that while it's helpful for getting an idea of what overall aircraft were flying certain routes back in the day, it doesn't really help for those wanting to look up flights on specific dates. But thanks to Connor, I was able to get some ideas of registrations for aircraft I flew on a trip to Pakistan in 2009. They might not be the exact registrations, but it was good to have some written down. So there we go, that brings us to the end of this rather random but also pretty fun to make video. I hope you enjoyed watching it and also listening to the various stories that I had from these flights that I took as a kid back in the day. If you have any questions regarding how to look up these flights or make a MyFlightRadar24 account, please do not hesitate to leave a comment below. Otherwise, don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe for more exciting uploads coming throughout the summer. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I really hope you didn't get bored watching all the way till the end. But anyways, thanks again, take care, and I'll see you next time.